Um, it's a great opportunity and a privilege to be addressing this August gathering. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vinay. As Tanay has introduced, I represent a firm called Singvi Devanoni, and I'm accompanied by my colleague, Just Jeevan. We are here all gathered to speak about a very complex, but a very important and a relevant topic. Valuation and in current times, the impact of valuation on businesses. Over the next 1 hour or so, we will be dedicating this session towards understanding some of the approaches towards valuation. What are the challenges and the key drivers for valuation and how that has changed over a period of time, and how regulators and regulations have evolved, and what are the kind of alignment that we see in each of the regulation to be able to arrive at a common point where we know that what is the price that we can attribute to a business. You know, there have been instances where we've lived in the COVID era for 5 months. If you would have come to us 5 months ago, you'd have said we live in a very uncertain world. The uncertainty has reduced a bit. It's not gone out completely but the degree of uncertainty has reduced. Valuation is an exercise where we look into the future. The one question or a thought that I want to leave with this audience is predicting a future not uncertain? And we always lived with this uncertainty in the past. The degree of the uncertainty has got accentuated in the current times. So because of this degree of uncertainty got accelerated in the current times, what is it that we are required to do, if there is one that we need to do, to change the course, change the thought process, change our actions to be able to arrive at what we believe is a fair value to an enterprise? The only probability factor now is that the uncertainty that has created now, more often than not, it may prove you wrong. The very noise of we getting a vaccine, the very fact that we are seeing the stock market doing well, the very fact that we are hoping for a V-shaped recovery, is it that we are talking about a knee-jerk reaction to really reset things out here? Or actually the course is the same? There was a small detour and we are back into the mainframe or the mainstream. So there are some of these aspects that we need to probably address. So just giving this context or this session or context, let me start with, there are certain slides that we put together, essentially comprising of the impact of COVID on the economy and capital markets, the valuation approaches, fundamentals and applicability, the valuation key drivers in current times, valuation approaches, and the alignment of valuation methods across respective verticals. The headline number that was announced last month, that the GDP has contracted by 23.9, and the contraction has been the worst in the world. Were we anticipating this? To some extent, yes. Has it made us vulnerable? To some extent, yes. But what are we supposed to do? Of course, there are a lot of policy decisions that the government is taking and hoping that the macro factors will start improving, the trade barriers will start coming down, people will be willing to travel, and so on and so forth, which is obviously going to help us come back and probably get to the trajectory of growth. Capital markets, there's always this very constant question that everybody asks. If the economy is contracted 23.9%, why did the stock market did not react to this change? There are various factors to this. One of the most important factor one would consider is value buying and liquidity. If in a process, when we see that a company which was available at a multi-X value, and if you're able to get that at a price significantly lower than that, and you believe that the uncertainty factor with that company is far lesser than any other company that you would compare it with, you believe that there is a value emerged. And when you couple that with the fact that I've actually not gone spending money and I have some disposable income to myself, and I need to look for an alternative source of income because I am not able to probably utilize this resources because the fixed deposit's not giving me the kind of return or any other reason, so and so forth, that may come across. Why don't I probably look at a value proposition and alternative source? And that's exactly what has happened. The dichotomy that has been here is while the economic macro factors are all showing negative growth, they are giving us absolutely abysmal numbers. Credit rating agencies are not giving good ratings to the country. But we realize that everybody, I mean, the market, which is supposed to be the barometer for the health of an economy, is doing phenomenally well. There must be some factors. One of the most important factors that we see is the emergence of value. Two is the abundance of liquidity. While one would like to say that we will only chase value without liquidity, or without liquidity, there will be no value. There is always this fight that goes on. But having said that, let's leave that argument for the time being because that's not the subject. But that I'm trying to say is the reason why we see this kind of a change that's happening is essentially because there is this value emergence and there is a huge amount of liquidity in the market, because a lot of these central banks have infused huge amount of liquidity in the market, asking their countries to go and invest wherever they believe that the value has emerged. So to that extent, we also see that there are some economies in the world which have already come to the pre-COVID level. India has some way to go. We went through the strictest of lockdowns, because of which there have been challenges. There is going to be some time before we can really get back to a real growth. Even before pre-COVID, we were already in an economy which was shrinking. Now, the fact of the matter is it's probably hit the bottom. All that we can see is the emergence of the Indian economy to come back in par with the rest of the globe. So that's the headline number again on the capital markets, and a very important debate as to why we see the market doing well as compared to the, or in contrast to the state of the economy. We just kind of put up a slide out here where we're probably telling you that, you know, one of the most important factors that we also need to consider is there are certain pockets of the economy which have done phenomenally well even at COVID times, because what we have realized is that some of these companies have actually done far better than what probably that COVID had offered. For example, some of these companies that we are talking about is, let's say, an IT company. There has been a great investment in information technology because everything is in the cloud. There have been infrastructures that have been spent for actually getting us into be able to work from home, remote location, whatever those reasons are. And we've seen that there are some drivers which have continued to grow. Those cylinders have continued to fire. And there are not so, and there are some segments of the economy which have not done well. Hospitality, retail, and some of those sectors associated with them. So there is this kind of a trade-off that's happening between companies which have done well and the companies which have not done so well. And because of which we also see some kind of an equilibrium created in the market, which kind of balances out the positives and the negatives. So this is on the macro factors. Moving on to the fact on the subject valuation. There are various approaches to valuation that one could probably consider. There could be situations that one need to customize the valuation approach to. So the most important approaches that one would look at is the cost approach. Essentially, what would it take for me to build a particular asset, intellectual property, or anything in the cost approach? Or what would it take for me if I were to actually build a technology, the cost of replacing a technology? So there's the cost approach, which essentially looks at the cost of building a product and the cost of replacing the product. This approach does not find too much of an importance in a company or in a concern which is in the growth phase. This is essentially more looked at in a scenario where the company is in an early stage, utilizing a lot of their resources in trying to build technology. They are really not really looking at, because they have not really come out with a monetization mechanism. So the reasons could be different, but very limited and with a very limited use. The next approach that one really looks at is the market-based approach. There are two subcategories to this. The one is to compare an industry or a company to its industry and say this company how does it fare with the industry? So we kind of benchmark it to that industry or some of the listed players in the industry. So let me say that there is an information technology company, which is a startup which wants to get into cloud sourcing or some kind of data analytics and is wanting to raise some capital. And it needs to establish what is the value at which it will be able to raise its capital. One of the ways that one would look at it is to find comparable companies and say, hey, here I have found a company which has got, which is listed. These companies are actually working at a certain multiple. Those multiples could be a multiple of revenue. It could be a multiple of the bottom line. Essentially, what we would normally take for the purpose of valuation is EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Or it could be a function of price to earnings, which is basically your net profit. Then there is the other subset to the market-based approach, which we normally would like to, we normally consider is that if this company is in a space which is data analytics and it is in the IT company, I look around through our sources, through certain tools and through analytic tools to say which are those companies which are in a similar space which have got funded by another independent valuation or an, if I may say, independent entity, which could be a fund or any kind of a private equity player or a third party. So the valuation-based approach normally looks at the peer, which is in the listed space, and arrive at a certain multiple, or we look at what is the kind of investments that we have seen that has happened in that segment. And if I were to kind of do an apple-to-apple comparison, if I'm able to kind of even out the uncertainties and the level playing field, then what would be the value that will be attributed to that company for that, and what is the price that we are willing to pay? The income-based approach, the more popular one, which really looks at the underlying earning potential of the business. And the underlying earning potential of the business is measured through the cash flows that it is able to generate after meeting all its expenses, all its capex, all its working capital and its debt, to arrive at what is the free cash flow that the company is able to generate over a foreseeable future. What would be the value of that enterprise at point X if we were to kind of discount it to the current value and arrive at that number. So typically the approach that one would look at to arrive at a company, the most widely used accepted principle of valuation is a blend of a market-based valuation approach and an income-based valuation approach. You know, there are companies who are at various stages, and then we really need to really customize our requirement to determine what would be the right method to adopt to value a particular company. Let's take an example that we have a startup. The startup is in the ideation stage. The company has not been able to monetize its, or has not been able to monetize its resources. It is still evaluating whether the business is capable of actually becoming one which has going to earn revenue, and it's got a market and it's got an opportunity to capture. That's still at an ideation stage. And how do I actually value a company at that point? I don't have any history. I don't have any revenue metrics. I don't have any background. I am just backing an individual who comes with an idea. More often than not, that individual is also in kind of a fix. Hey, but today I don't have a revenue. Why would somebody back me for this? And what should be the price that one is willing to pay for this business? And then we go about actually determining, it's a rule of the thumb. Do I actually compare it with a mature company? Do I really need to go down and actually say that, hey, but let's kind of put a future projection, and if this were to actually really convert itself, then this is the value that you can attribute to that business if you were to discount it to the current price. Actually, when you were to, when you were to look at a startup with an idea stage, pre-money, pre-monetization phase, there is no really defined rule. It could also be dependent on saying that you go to an investor, the investor looks at it and says, you know what, I'm expecting some kind of a 20% return on my investment. If I were to kind of look at your business and I were to discount all your factors and I were to come at a number, if I am able to get a return on your business at this IRR, which is your internal rate of return or a return on investment, I'm willing to give this business this value. And that's where, there is a lot of the back and forth that goes between the investor and the promoter to figure out what is the right value to an enterprise, because there is never a matrix defined for a startup. So more often than not, that entrepreneur at that stage, he works with his gut, he works with his instinct, he works with his conviction, he works with what he's done in the past. He believes that this is the value that I will be able to give to the business. And hey, I don't need to go to a structured financing institute. Let me kind of do an angel round with my friends and family and actually sell the story to them. And more often than not, most angel startups actually receive funding through their friends and family, and he's able to kind of influence upon them as to why that this business is a great business. For example, Infosys, while all of us know about that company, was exactly funded by an angel. That was that Mr. Narayana got his seed funding from his wife, and then he was able to convert that business and give the kind of return that all of us know about. When we arrive at this, as I said, there is a lot of it is a gut, a lot of it is conviction, a lot of it is belief in the management, a lot of it is belief in the narrative that he brings about. I'm introducing a very important term here, which is a narrative. A business is just not a mere number crunching or a business modeling on an Excel sheet. It is that storytelling. What is it that story he's actually telling me? What is it that opportunity that story carries? What is that opportunity that is capable of growing? Is there a perpetual end to that value or that opportunity? And when I actually sit down and assess all of it, and I say, hey, but this business is far more than what the entrepreneur is saying. And I believe that there is an intrinsic value which will get unlocked if things were to go all well. And I'm willing to probably give this business the value that he's asking for, or I'm willing to give the business a value. And I'm willing to kind of play the bet. And the bet is on that individual more than the business at that point of time. And because of which, they always say that angel money is always more expensive than the money that you would raise at the subsequent round. And some of the common valuation approaches that we use at that stage is a cost approach or an income approach. One of the reasons why we also use cost approach is, let's say that we need to get a good technology guy and I cannot afford that money to be paid to that individual because he's an expensive resource, but I need to still get him. And I need to get him at a point where I believe that the company needs him, but I cannot afford that from a cash perspective or a cash flow perspective. Then what do? Then I do a valuation. I mean, I offer him SOPs, which is your employee stock options, and I get him on board and I lure him and I tell him that there is a great value proposition that we can unlock together. And here you take a certain share of the company. And for this company, because it is in the current stage, the uncertainty is there. Let me kind of tell you that this value, one unlock, will give you this kind of a return at that point of time. And let's arrive at a number today. And I may sometimes use that as a cost-based approach and a net asset value method to arrive at that number. But if I were to look at a rapid expansion or a high growth, which are your next subsequent streams, this is a stage where the company has actually moved on from ideation to a stage where it is monetizing its resource. It's in the path of growth. There are two ways that one would look at growth: revenue growth, earnings growth. The fact is that rapid expansion, many of the companies are in that phase that we need to capture market, we need to capture customers, we need to capture opportunities, and I'm willing to actually let go a certain level of my earnings that I would have envisaged in the normal scenario. And that is why we see a lot of these companies which burn a huge amount of cash, but they continue to derive a huge value or a valuation from their investors, only because they are in that phase of rapid growth. That means that they are penetrating the market with great intensity. They are able to get that acceptance. That means they're also able to onboard customers. Otherwise, why would anybody not go for a value services if they do not see that service actually of the quality or the need that one looks for? So there is this kind of a two-way kind of a street here, that while I'm offering you a level of service, you're also willing to accept the value of that service at that price point, and because of which I'm able to garner that market share that I always wanted to try for. The third phase, which is the high growth phase, and this is where the management gets down to a phase of thinking that I have captured the market. Now it's time to return my investment to my investors, to my stakeholders, to whoever are involved in the company. I need to look at an approach which is slightly different from what I did in the previous scenarios. I need to look at a mechanism by which I will be able to probably deliver returns, dividends, cash packs, whatever I need to do. For that perspective, I need to also kind of realign my business strategy and see what it would take. And from that phase, between rapid to high growth phase, we are in an intense high growth situation. And that intensity is again driven by what is the earning potential of the business. And the approach that I would adopt at that stage is going to be your income approach, which is nothing but actually discounting your future cash flow, because the visibility is better, the conviction is stronger, the market acceptance has already happened. People love my story, they are liking my narrative, I like the product that I'm delivering to the client, and I am able to command the valuation that I need to get for my business. And there I say, but what is the value that I need to give to my business? I cannot put a certain price tag like any of us would go to a retail product and pick up a product based on the price tag. It follows a certain science that it actually looks at the numbers, and it puts that, we put that number into an Excel sheet and start crunching it. But there is also the qualitative aspect. What is the management capable of? Is the management capable of taking the growth to the next level? Is the management is following a certain governance standards? Is the management actually decentralized its operation? Is the management actually fulfilling all the commitments that it made to the stakeholders and has actually lived up to them? It's not that they have actually defaulted in whatever that they need to. So there is this whole storyline in terms of the narrative from a qualitative aspect, and there is a quantitative aspect, and they need to be blended. Once I put this blend together, I arrive at a value, and that value is nothing but the approach. I mean, that value is nothing but that intrinsic business opportunity which is unlocking itself through the blend of the aspects which is qualitative and quantitative. And that's when I'm able to sell this story to an investor who's willing to back me. And this is the stage where I would be looking at a private equity, to a venture capitalist, to any other HNI who's willing to back my story. At this stage, unlike what I was trying to sell my story at an ideation stage where I need to really press the pedal to actually convince somebody to put their money into my business with a very high risk probability, the probability of risk has diminished in this scenario. And because of which, I'm able to demonstrate the conviction of the business to actually move forward for not only a foreseeable future, but beyond a foreseeable future. And that's when I am able to tell my investor, hey, I am willing to take your investment, provided the terms are mine, the valuation is mine, and I'm willing to probably, have you as an investor on my cap table, because now you're riding on a speedboat. And that speedboat is going to be a great story. And that's something which is only going to allow all of us to grow. And finally, a matured growth company, when all of the investments have actually matured, somebody looks for an exit, either through an IPO or through a strategic sale. Again, at that point of time, there is a valuation exercise carried out. And again, the approach that normally uses is the income approach or the market approach. Life was all good until we were all hit with this uncertainty. But in my opening remark, I also mentioned that when I'm looking at the future, I'm always doing a projection. I'm always doing a forecasting. Is forecasting not creating an element of uncertainty? Is forecasting not creating an element of ambiguity? Is forecasting something which is a guesstimate, which is a judgment of an individual or a belief in his business? Of course, endorsed by a certain group of investors and is endorsed by the various stakeholders. But the certainty always remained. As I mentioned earlier, in COVID times, the uncertainty, the degree of the uncertainty has gone up. Because the degree of the uncertainty has gone up, now I cannot just sit back. I have to be the edge of the seat. And I have to look at my business. And I have to look at the storytelling that I did previously. I have to look at the numbers. I have to look at the proposition. I have to look at the macro factors. I have to look at the micro factors, and then take a call of what I need to do with my business. In simple terms, I just have to go back to my basics to figure out that all the past that I did, great to know. Whatever I achieved, good to know. But now, life is not the same. I have to reset a few things in life, a few things in the business. The resetting process, while it may come back to the same result that I had pre-COVID or before the challenges that came to us. But this is a scenario where I am not alone. This is a scenario where the entire world is grappling with. This is a scenario which is macro. And if I am able to address the macro, will I know that my micro can be well taken care of? If the macro is not going to function the way it should, then the fact of the matter is the chances of my micro, managing my macro or mitigating my micro risk will continue to persist. What do I mean by the macro factors? The headline number, 23.9% GDP growth. I have given my, the company's moratorium. Now, the first impact of the moratorium, if that were to go away, or if something which some companies now are going to pay, is my banking system is going to collapse. If my banking system is going to collapse and it's not being able to actually recover its dues, which is actually due to them because of this macro factor, the health of an economy will automatically bear the brunt of this challenge. So what do we need to do? So obviously we need to set in motion a mitigating process, and that's at a policy level. Then I will look at the micro. What segment do I need to be in? What is the impact of this segment? What is the change in course that I need to bring about? I believe that I am going to generate an X amount of cash flow at year one. And this X amount of cash flow that I was supposed to generate has completely evaporated. What happened? And that is the fact of going back to the basics. Forget what happened last year. Forget what happened at the beginning of the year. Relook at your business. Look at those drivers. What was your main principal driver of a business? Was it a customer facing client? Or let's say it's a consumer driven business. For example, we know the two-wheeler business the rentals of two-wheeler business has taken a significant hit. So what's my driver for the business? That the customer who was using public transport is no more my customer willing to use the service. What am I supposed to do? What is the change in the course? So one of the things that they did is, I am on a last mile connectivity for my consumer. Now I'm going to give my consumer an experience of able to rent a bike for a longer period where he does not have to look at actually buying a vehicle. I'm going to make it a cheaper proposition. I'm going to take all of his headache of managing a vehicle. I'm actually going to make him a COVID-free, hassle-free, bike ride. And I'm going to give him a far better experience just merely picking up a bike on the roadside and dropping it in another road. So that is the change that one looks at. And then says that the resetting the basics is to say, what is it that I am going to do to my business to probably bring the value proposition back and actually probably without changing the course. Let me give you an example of another client of ours, or probably on a no-name basis, that they were in a business of actually a consumer product. And the moment the COVID happened, that consumer product was something which was not getting sold it had no takers for it. And immediately, because I had the facility, I had the infrastructure, I had the capacity, I changed the course of the business to actually start making masks and start making those shields and start making those PPE kits. And today, with that innovation and change in strategy, they were able to go back into the market with a stronger vigor and go back into the market to be able to derive the same value, if not of a higher value for the business, because the speed at which they were able to innovate, the speed at which they were able to adapt allowed them to probably go back and capture the market. Maybe not for product A, but certainly for product B. Maybe it was not part of my portfolio, but it has now become an integral part of my business opportunity. So what it requires is that we need to go back into the basics and look at what is it that I have to do to arrive at that business proposition, which will give me or which will earn me that value that was lost. Some of the parameters or the drivers that one would look at is the cash flow forecast. The common statement that everybody makes these days is that we got to preserve cash, and rightly so. In the process of preserving cash, I need to look at what are the drivers for my cash. I had a very kind of a robust business model up to December 2019. And then I was hit by this major issue that all of us are grappling with. Now I have to look at my cash flow of cash generating ability for a foreseeable future and see, is that going to continue? Is it going to be for a short period of time? If it is not, it's going to be for a short period of time, then I just need to do a minor adjustment and I will be back on track. If it is going to impact me for a longish period of time, let's say airline industry. How comfortable am I going to take my family for a holiday over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Maybe a vaccine is found. Maybe things are getting normal. But the overhang is going to be so vivid that I'm going to be a little apprehensive about saying that, is that a good time for me to really take my family for a holiday and probably move from one destination to another? And that's a structural change. But what does an airline industry do? Except for hope for survival and a bailout, what does one do? There are other businesses which are connected to the airline industry. Let's talk about the industry which caters food to the airline. If I'm not going to be on the sky, who's going to eat my food online or on board? What is it that I'm supposed to do now? What is the change of action or the change of course that I need to undertake to be able to probably navigate through this crisis? It's food. So I don't really need to serve somebody food on board 30,000 feet above. Let's change the course and probably start serving food for the people who are on ground. And I need to change that course. And I need to kind of get back to be able to generate the cash flow that is required to run the business. The question may come is, what does a manufacturing guy do? Because he's invested a significant amount of money on his capex. Of course, there is a huge challenge. We don't have a one-size-fits-all kind of a solution for this. Today, what we see is the trend is the companies which are flexible, are lean, who are able to adapt to the change, will be able to tide over through this crisis sooner than a company which is probably hard asset based, who's actually invested a significant amount of money on their capex, have probably on the touch and feel. That means it's a plant and machinery that's been created. It's all about survival, wait it out, innovate, adapt, change, but the revenue driver, the cash driver needs to start ticking. We need to start moving forward. There are costs. Again, in the same example, that I have a fixed cost to run an operation versus the company which is lean is not dependent on any kind of a cost. It's just that there are tech companies which says that we will hire and at a point in time we will fire. Can I say the same thing for all the sectors across? Not possible. But there will have to be a rationalization measure to be taken. And that is why we see that India is facing the highest unemployment rate in the country, because it is the same factor that, if I'm not able to generate revenue, if I'm not having alternative sources of revenue, if I'm not able to adapt, or my business is not in a position to adapt to the changed environment, my drivers have changed, and because of which I need to probably look at alternative modes of rationalizing and surviving. Wise man said, this is the year not to make investments, this is the year only to survive. And if that is the mode that is the tone at which I need to conduct myself, then I have no choice, but I will take all the measures that will require for the company to survive. And for that, my cost drivers then come into play because my revenue drivers have failed. And capital investment. We are already living with a very high, capacity, which is not being utilized. So where is the question of me making more investment? We may continue to grow. That means that today we were zero. Like in April, automobile companies reported zero sales. And in September, for August, they are more or less back to 80% of pre-COVID days. The fact of the matter, they had the wherewithal to withstand the challenges. But there are so many industries who are associated with them, which could not withstand those intense pressure. Because they may be highly levered, they may be leveraged, they do not have the cash flow to have survived within the 3 months, And we've seen a lot of those companies actually break down. So to that extent, while we may see the growth, like I was given the example of the automobile, that there was zero to, coming to pre-COVID or maybe 80% of pre-COVID level. But all that I'm doing is I'm just doing a catch up. That I was working on a low base of an economy at 4% to an economy at a minus 23%. Now I have to start catching up and come to 0.0 first, and then start growing and come to 4%, and then look at a growth trajectory. So all that while we may say that people are saying, oh, we're going to see a V-shaped recovery, we are seeing people actually buying. Actually, it is nothing but a factor of a low base effect, the factor of a pent-up demand which was waiting in the sideline. And of course, the fact of the matter is that, we are hoping to see some level of normalcy to return, because we are now allowed to go to work and actually now allowed to probably resume our lives partially, while there is a sense of caution. But the fact of the matter is that the country is trying to open up. Having said that, it is also important to factor that, let's give an example. And this is something upon companies to probably consider. And this is not an immediate fix, but something that where TCF announced that they're going to ensure for the foreseeable future that their team is going to actually work out of, a majority of their team rather will be working from home. But while it may be a great strategy for the company, the question that I have to ask the management is, sir, you are not kickstarting an economy. You are not helping an economy to move forward. You're not allowing people to go to work and spend. While we appreciate that there has to be safety measures to be taken, and that is primemost in the current environment, but for you to make an announcement for a foreseeable future, I believe that that's not going to augur well for an economy as a whole. And that is something which probably has to be, so we need to have a right balance of knowing what our drivers are going to be to A, ensure we are able to address the macro factors, and B, we are basis the macro factors. When the mood is good, the fact of the matter, it will percolate down to a micro factor at an industry level and then to a company level. Giving you an example of two industries here. One is an edtech company, and there is the other one which is into a conventional offline learning company. The news was yesterday, or today's morning paper was that Bangalore-based Byju's has actually raised a round of funding at 10.8. That means it is at a price higher than their previous round of funding. And here we have another company which is listed on the stock market, which is actually quoting at a 50% to the discount, while they be addressing the same segment of people for their revenue. However, the part that I mentioned was that the company which was able to adapt to the changed environment is the company which has been able to progress first and faster. I said first and faster in the current environment. Are we saying that this is going to be the way that, finally everybody will get online? I have children, and my only challenge is that how do I go to make them sit in front of a computer for the next 8 hours on a 24 not on a 5-day week? And I have an issue there. If children do not socialize, if they are not able to go and actually learn and exchange notes and speak and actually understand the social fabric of the society, how does it going to work? That is why the tailwind today is in favor of an edtech company, and because of which it is going to command a premium, and it is going to command a premium at its high lifetime value. But here is another company which is doing exactly the same of providing education, but is not able to probably address the current environment. And mind you, if they're not going to adapt, they're not going to change, if they're not going to innovate, and if they're going to wait for the air to clear, possibly the 50% erosion that we say may become 100% erosion, because the fact of the matter is that the business dynamics have changed and the drivers have changed, and the drivers require me to probably look at things differently. And that is the aspect that is extremely important to consider when we are going to be looking at valuation in the current environment. Let it not influence you to say that, hey, but if we are in current environment, it's a generic statement that everybody is saying uncertainty is a factor, and I don't think so that I'm willing to put money in a business which is probably, while it has the opportunity, but, I'm just giving an excuse that it is a current environment and I would like to give it a 80% discount or a 70% discount or a 30% discount. That's not what it is. It's about the narrative, and it is a narrative and the numbers. They need to go together. If the story is good, if the opportunity is good, if the ask is reasonable, and reasonable is a relative term. I believe that you need to customize bespoke each of these valuation approaches independent to each of those segments that comes in. If a startup comes to me, or plenty of startups who come to me and ask, saying, sir, I want to raise fund and I have a great business. I'm going to app or the opportunity is great. And, because, it is pre-COVID day. And I used to ask him one question. So do you have something in mind? Yes, sir, I'm expecting a post-money valuation of 5 million. Post-money is nothing but pre-money. That is the money before investment, the value of the company before investment, plus investment is post-money. I said, great. So you've already decided, you've done a mental math that your company is worth $5 million and that's the price that you want to sell. And if the same individual comes to me in COVID times doing the same business and the market opportunity continues to be remaining the same, the question that I will ask him is, do you think that you need to still get 5 million? Don't you need to discount the factor of COVID? But I said, hello, but my opportunity has gone up better. In fact, I should be asking $7 million as a storyline. And there could be a contrary view to that. A business which is not being able to adapt or is not the flavor in the current environment will actually probably not even get the investment, because it's very hard for investors to put in money in a business which is not going to give me the kind of value that it's supposed to give. So we were in our experience in the last 3-4 months. What we also realized is that, whenever we took good opportunities to our investors, they came back and said, Vinay, this is not a great time for us to put in money, because I don't believe that unlocking of the value will happen. Actually, one of the most important factors that were playing out is the current investments that they had made, or the investments they had made in their companies. They needed to be taken care of. They needed to be nurtured. They needed additional capital, and because of which, a lot of the company money which was actually held for growth or for further diversification got redeployed to those companies which wanted the money to probably survive the current times. And I am also told that many of these companies continue to retain their valuation at the same price at which they had raised the money in the previous round. It could be a case where the fact is that because there are other challenges that play along when an investment happens. One of the most important clauses that need to keep in mind is the anti-dilutive clause. That if I'm going to do a down round in a company, the fact of the matter is that then I need to allot for additional shares to ensure that the shareholding of the individual who's actually diluting because of a down round where the value of the enterprise has come down, I need to protect it. I need to allot more shares. That means the promoter's holding in that scenario comes down even more than what he was supposed to dilute. I may be a little fast, but I'm just trying to cover some of these important, phrases and aspects, which is something which probably what we noticed is, while we gave COVID as a reason, actually COVID was not the reason. The fact of the matter is there were other aspects, and it was completely customized to that business environment. And fact of the matter is, we are also seeing the change in the mood, where now people, investors, HNIs, people who are willing to deploy money to growth capital are looking at opportunities and now willing to open the purse. Things were a little hunky-dory 4 months back. Uncertainty was greater. The uncertainty degree is fallen, but the uncertainty remains. But again, reiterating, uncertainty was always there in any business. A startup with no monetization receiving funding, the uncertainty was then there. The only chance here is that you may fail. It may not do as well as you thought. So that's the only change that I see in this environment. The other aspect that is very important to understand is that, business valuation, or if I were to use an income-based approach, the drivers being cash flow, one, that is the earning ability of the company for a foreseeable future, which I need to discount it. The discounting factor is the weighted average cost of capital. Weighted average cost of capital is nothing but a blend of your debt and equity. Now, debt has come down. Debt was available pre-COVID at 12%, 14%, 16%, depending on who you approach, from a financial institution to an NBFC. Debt is now available at 9%, 10%. And because of which my cost of capital comes down, and because of which my expected return also comes down. That means I'm discounting a business at a lower discounting factor. And because of which, am I going to get a higher value to a business? No. The fact of the matter is the risk premium, which is the equity. The expectation on the equity has gone up. And that is purely correlated to the risk factor attached to it. that if the risk factor is higher now, my hope of getting a higher return on that investment is also in correlation to that. And because of which, I am saying that my discounting factor, that is the weighted average cost of capital, the weightage of an equity or debt being higher in a scenario, I'm just presuming, because of which my discounting rate goes up. And because my discounting rate goes up, the value at or the discounting factor allows me to discount the business at a much higher rate, and because of which the value comes down. One may question that, is that the right approach? I said I cannot have a one size fit all kind of a scenario. Everything needs to be customized to that company, to that industry, to that segment, to what they're catering, what is the value proposition, what is the narrative, what is the storytelling. And thereafter I will come out to a point to say that COVID or no COVID, the opportunity is great, the metrics are sound, the drivers are in its place, the business commands its value, and because of which I would give it the value that it deserves. The value may be different from a buyer's perspective to a seller's perspective. As I said, I cannot give a price tag to a business. I can give a range. A range in this scenario, in the COVID scenario, has only got extended. That if I worked on a range of a lower to a higher value of a 10%, may go up to 20%, may up to go 30%. That means I'm willing to give a valuation, a wider range to a value or to an enterprise. Nothing else has changed. And that's a part of a negotiation. That's a part of a opportunity that lies ahead of us, the way we see it, not the way the buyer is presenting, the way the seller is perceiving it, the way the tax regulator is saying, hey, but you know what, U5627 is saying that, you cannot issue shares at a premium, and I'm going to validate that. And if you're going to actually issue it at a premium, I'm going to tax that premium. My question to that is, when a buyer and a seller have agreed to buy and sell a particular company for whatever reason, how does a regulator understand that nuance and being able to come to a point to judge me to say that I undersold my company, or rather I oversold my company, and because of which I am supposed to pay tax on that. But the guy, as actually the person who's put in the money, is willing to accept that value and is willing to play along that risk. And because of that risk, there is the premium, and the premium results in a higher return. So what's wrong with that? And that's going to be a part of a debate that's going to come up significant in our assessments that we're going along. That, the projection that we have submitted 2 years back to a department, and while the matter will come up for hearing now, and when he looks at the projection and he say, hey, give me a cash flow statement and tell me what have you done, we don't have any directive there. Now we have left to the whims and fancies of the assessing officer to decide that he is going to give a discount to a COVID factor, or he's not going to give a discount to COVID factor. And he says that actually you sold your company to a premium, and because of which you're going to pay a tax. I find that a bit absurd. That's my personal view. But for all that, we still have a regulation that we need to address. We have an investor perspective, we have a seller's perspective, we have a regulator perspective. And for each of them, the factors remain very differently in this current environment. I said nothing has changed. Business remains the same. All of us will continue to buy, eat food, and spend more. There are some pockets of the business which will not do well. It'll take time. But once it opens up, all of us know that we will all obviously go out on a holiday. We'll go to a restaurant. We will actually go for a cruise. We're going to do whatever it takes. And then all the ancillary and support industries that are supporting these large segments are also going to start flourishing. Maybe it'll take about 12 months, maybe 18 months. So I will be wary about making investment in that segment. While it may be a compelling buy if I were to really go by the numbers, because the P is dropped, while the P is dropped, that doesn't really mean that it becomes an automatic, it comes onto a buy schedule. Obviously, the factors which are extraneous, which are segment oriented, industry oriented, macro oriented, are also going to come into play. So these are factors that one would need to probably consider while he's actually looking at a valuation of an enterprise and say, you cannot just paint it with a single brush that it is COVID and it is at a discount of 50%. That will be absolutely unfair. The fact of the matter is, it has to be a blend and a combination of all of the factors taken into consideration. There may be certain aspects which will be counted, but it does not necessarily count in the whole proposition. And there are some aspects which count a lot, but are not worthy of being counted. So there is this very kind of a dichotomy statement, but the fact of the matter, there is a deep insight to it. And that deep insight comes in from a fact that don't influence this current environment to validate a particular industry or a segment or a company. There will be pockets of it, which of course will not be the flavor, will take its time, but I will not base my judgment on this. The judgment has to come from all other factors that's it's supporting it. We had the financial crisis in 2008. We said banks are going to collapse. City came to a brink of collapse. City came to a point 10 cent, and it was in the brink of collapse and it got bailed out. Yes, there will be scenarios where companies will go up or will come down. And I would not base a judgment or make a statement which says that, my decision will be based on this current environment. The factor has to take into consideration all the other aspects as well. And that is an important aspect for us to consider. While we spoke about the income-based approach and the drivers there, likewise, when we actually look at the market-based approach, where we are looking at the peer companies and seeing what multiples that they are trading at, it could be a price earning multiple, EBITDA level multiple that's earning, or at a revenue based multiple. Or I may look at a comparable transaction of a company which has been funded in the space, and I will look at what would have changed for them. If the price earning multiple of an industry has contracted from, let's say, a 20x to maybe a 10x, and if I were to take that metrics into consideration, and just simply apply the formula saying today my revenue is or EBITDA is, let's say, $100,000, and it was quoting at 20x, now it's become 10x. Do I give a 20x multiple or do I give a 10x multiple of the EBITDA? Those are aspects that you need to be careful about when you use a market-based approach. For all you know, you may at this moment not give it so much of a weightage to a market-based approach because we have seen significant contraction. But you may also turn around and say that, it purely depends on the segment that I am in, and that segment is flourishing. And I would actually not give it, and that segment unlocked itself. For example, let me say that pharmaceutical company and life sciences company, they were for the longest period of time quoting at a very minimal or at a low price earning multiple as compared to its other pockets of growth in the market. Now, because I'm a startup in the life sciences space and I'm doing great analytics and trying to create something which is going to change the way that stream of life science is going to change, then I need to compare it with my peer in the current environment, because I need to factor that the dynamics have changed. The unlocking of value has changed. People are now going to be more careful about. So today, if my allocation to medical was, let's say, 5% of my total budget, I've made that 15%. And I'm going to actually say this change is what I am going to bring about as a business opportunity myself. So again, I can't say a one size fit all kind of a matrix that I can apply, but it is important to figure this out to say that what is the company or that segment that I'm addressing, what is the level of customization that I need to factor, and whether I need to give a due weightage to a market multiple. And if I were to, what will I apply that at a revenue level, at an earning level, at a price earning, at an EBITDA level, a blend of all three, because then I need to kind of come to a point of consensus, and I need to be in a legitimate range. I can't be unreasonable. When I say legitimate, it is a reasonable range. That means that I need to state that the value proposition is to be factored basis this, and this is my assumption, this is my analysis, this is the reason, backed by solid research. We would never issue a report on using a market approach or any other unless we are convinced. Because you will say that how can I compare a startup to a mature company? Absolutely right. I cannot compare a startup to a mature company. I need to start reducing, removing, excluding all aspects, which to ensure that I am able to compare an apple to an apple. And that is an extremely, careful exercise that one needs to carry out when we are undertaking some of these valuation approach. And in current times, we are seeing fluctuation. If I take an average of the last 5 months, the level of fluctuation that we have seen in the market multiple and the price earning multiple, where the market at one point was 7,500 from its peak of 12,000, and today it is somewhere in between. This huge fluctuation needs to be addressed. We need to neutralize it. We need to probably assess it. Is this the trend which has structurally changed forever? or the trend needs to be modified and customized to the current environment. That let's not give it a knee-jerk reaction. If the contraction has happened at the macro level, I think at a research level, I realized that everybody is giving us a certain kind of a growth trajectory. And for me, in the segment which is connected to the economy directly, then I need to factor it. Hey, but I am not a company which is connected to the macro factors in India. Actually, my entire business is coming from the Middle East or from an America. Then why should I really look at what is the policy that the government is adopting for it to probably revive itself? I should be worried about the elections that are happening in US, and what is the kind of policy that they're going to have, and what is the impact of that H1B visa that is going to happen on the business. Because if they're not going to open up that, then the fact of the matter is that I continue to be living in a very rigid environment, and there is a constraint. And this got nothing to do with the fact that what is happening in COVID in India, where if India were to say that we are reporting the second largest number in the world and competing with the first. But that's not the fact. The fact is that it needs to probably zero it's down to its level of that business, to that company, and taking it up to the macro factors. Those are aspects that we continue to take into cognizance. Just give you another tailwind example of a market multiple where Infosys declared their results, and they declared results better than what Evans Street was expecting, and also what the way the economy is doing. But 85% of the revenue of these companies coming from outside India. And I've diversified play. I've been able to adapt. I've been able to make data analytics as one of the integral part of my business opportunity. And that transformation actually, this current environment helped me to transform faster and for companies to adopt better. And because of which I'm able to get a premium valuation, and because of which I'm able to probably show better results, and because of which I'm doing well. And likewise, a sector which is so locally dependent on the local macro factors, government policies, financial RBI policies, local policies, company which is like real estate, supposed to be the second largest employer in the country. But people are not allowed to actually, labor forces have gone out. We have, complex tax structures. The cost of capital is not falling or expected to fall as much as we can or we wanted. Commodity prices are going up because oil and the diesel and petrol are at all-time high in India. So there are these factors that suddenly start playing. I need to start taking into consideration all of these things. A company which is profitable has now turned negative because of these factors playing out. Here, I need to look at it, saying that, but I'm a segment which cannot be ignored. I'm a segment which needs to be given the necessary impetus. And I need to look at the macro factors which are domestic. I need to look at the macro factors which are micro factors which are to the company's perspective. For example, let me say this: while we may say that real estate may not do well, but let me give you an example. The government's push of Make in India, inviting a lot of new companies to come and set up. What do they need? They need data centers. They need warehouses. They need offices. They need houses for their people. They need guest houses. They need hotels to stay. Let their guests stay. What are you doing? You are in a sense indirectly contributing to the growth of the segment. The growth may not be visible today. Me as a company may not be participating as part of the growth because I'm in a segment which is not actually benefiting from the policy that the government has initiated. Then I have to look at the company differently from that segment that it operates in, and from that segment to that region. Whether this segment works very regional wise, that I'm a very micromanaged entity, that if I'm very strong in a region, I need not necessarily be strong in any other region. Let's say DLF is strong in North India. It has no significant presence at all in South India. So obviously what matters to me is the policies of the state in North India. And that's something which I need to study and figure out what is the consequential impact if I were to do a valuation of a similar company in an unlisted space or size smaller than that. So these are factors that we would probably want to consider to be able to say that, hey, what is the impact, what we need to do, what is the change in action, and what I need to do differently. Maybe I will not do residential houses. I may actually everywhere start getting into warehousing. But I may not do commercial offices. I may get into data centers. I may not do data centers. I will get into something else. I am in the same business, but I'm changing the course. I need to capture that, reset, get back to basics, understand figure out what the strategy is, what the narrative is. Is there a change in the narrative? Not a change in the narrative. The change in narrative will result in the change in number. The number will not change the narrative. Yeah. So far, what we've covered is the approach and how some of these aspects, which are the drivers for the valuation, has impact on businesses. We also have, taken into consideration some of the, aspects of reorganizing. So when a company gets into a reorganization mode, let's say there's a merger process or an acquisition process, far easier, right? I need to probably look at the acquisition from a buyer's perspective, the seller's perspective. When I'm doing a merger, which is an amalgamation, then what are the factors that I need to consider? And when I need to consider those factors, what are those approaches that I need to adapt to be able to arrive at that number? That is the most commonly used, of course, is again the income approach and the market approach. For all that, we're trying to figure out, the most appropriate method of arriving at the valuation metrics. Sorry, there's some disturbance. Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to say here is that, again, when we're doing a valuation, there are various scenarios where a valuation exercise needs to be carried out. The valuation could be from a buyer's perspective, a seller's perspective, as part of a transaction, as part of a partnership, part of a joint venture. It could be part of an ESOP planning. It could be part of a company internal reorganizing, that they are demerging some of the business units. It could be because of some kind of a fundraise that they're carrying out. It could be because I'm going IPO. It's because I'm doing a flip. That means I'm moving from one country to another country, maybe from India to outside India, or from outside India to India. There could be various scenarios for which I need to carry out a valuation approach. We have listed down a few of the valuation approaches here. I've taken up merger valuation. I'll request my colleague, just Steven, probably just can you take us through the rest of those options that we have as part of the reorganization process, where all that we will be looking at valuation and what kind of a valuation approach that one would adopt, and why would we adopt that valuation approach? Just?
Yeah. So can you just go to the next slide, Vinay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now, in terms of the internal organizations restructuring, one of the restructuring that happens is business combinations. So under business combinations, what we need to do is, once we pay a certain price for a particular entity, what is the total price of that particular entity? Then we need to allocate it to the respective assets that you acquire. We use certain, what are the value of those assets based on the books? They give us a certain price. Then the difference between the price that you paid and the price that is there on the books of this company that you acquired, that difference is the goodwill that we need to factor in our, in our books. But also we need to factor in the intangibles. Like all businesses have certain number of intangibles. It could be your intellectual property, it could be your brands, it could be your customer contracts. So, even those have to be factored. Then subtracting from your price that you paid, the intangible value, and then the cost of some of the fixed assets that are being taken on board, we get the goodwill. Now, under Ind AS 103, the approaches that we can use to value some of these intangibles under the income-based approach are royalty relief method, multi-period excess earning method, and then obviously under market approach also, we can use certain transactions. For example, if we know that certain transactions similar, again, in market approach, it's very important to keep in mind that we need to always make sure that the assets are comparable in nature. So when you're comparing patents of different industries, they need to be comparable. Since data for that is limited in the market approach, it's very hard to come by. The approaches that are typically used are the income-based approach. I'll give you one case study wherein we were working with the leading healthcare technology company, which had acquired a company in the States. And one of the reasons or the rationale for the acquisition was synergies. And the primary synergy for them was certain companies that the acquired company had in touch with was what this company was looking to penetrate into. So by acquiring this company, they were able to build those connects or the contacts or establish relationships with that particular entity. With those, in terms of customers that they were able to leverage to build their revenues. So one of the methods that we can use to, in this case, what we had to identify, we had to value was customer contracts. And one of the ways that we can value this customer contracts is through multi-period excess earnings. So what we need to figure out is, based on your future cash flows or your future revenues, what percentage of revenues are coming from those contracts. Now, again, contracts are not that are going to, run for like forever. I mean, they have certain period of time, might be 5 years, 6 years, 3 years. And then what is the retention? So when we look at this company, we need to see or analyze their contracts, try to figure out how long those contracts are, what are the retention that the company has typically taken, and going forward, how long can this last? Based on that, we estimate a certain percentage, which based on based on attrition, a certain discount is factored. That gives a certain amount of revenues that are attributable to those contracts in this case. Then we also need to figure out what are the costs incurred, right? I mean, there are certain costs that the company incurs. These could be factored by looking at their contributory assets. This could be your fixed assets. This could be a working capital requirement. For all of this, we need to figure out what the return on those capital are. Try to estimate what percentage of value or cost can be derived from those returns that the company would typically incur, and factor those costs. And then in terms of the net realizable value is what you discount back and say, this is what the value of that particular customer contract is. And this is what we had done in this particular case study. And so in terms of generally, once you're able to identify intangibles which can be separated, which can be identified, and factoring in certain fixed assets that can be taken on board from the acquired company. And then once you subtract these two from your value of the business, what we get is goodwill, which we then take it on our books. So this is one of the examples that we have done for purchase price allocation. Next slide.
Yeah. So the point that I want to make here also is that when we're doing a purchase price allocation, it is important to know that a significant portion of the allocation will be towards goodwill. Typically, something which, if you have not done this in the past, it's just to keep in mind that the percentage that the goodwill will be attributed to the total purchase price would be in the range of about 60 to 75%, sometimes even higher, where the goodwill valuation happens. And then every year we test the goodwill for impairment and then do a separate valuation exercise of that goodwill and arrive at whether there is a need for an impairment or not.
So one of the other things that we look at is some of the ESOPs that are issued.
Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the things that we can look at is ESOP valuation. So under ESOP, there is guidance prescribed under accounting for employee-based share payment issued by ICAI. What methods that we can typically use under this is your intrinsic value method, using your income asset to arrive at the equity share value. And once you know the equity value, then we can use your Black-Scholes or binomial method. One of the companies that we recently did a valuation for was this emerging startup, which is digital startup, which is based out of Singapore. So in terms of, they recently had got their Series D round done sometime last year. And in terms of, we had tried to figure out what the value of the ESOP could be. But before determining what the ESOP of the option value is, we need to determine what the equity value is. Now, because in terms of, they had a recent transaction wherein, we know that the recent transaction was done at a certain price, but this happened sometime, say about 8 to 10 months. So it's still within range where you can still say that the company would be still fairly valued, and we can take that as a benchmark. But the fact is that even COVID has taken place in this environment, right? So in terms of what the company was estimating in terms of future revenues, still the growth is strong, but the forecast is a bit muted. So we had to also consider an income-based approach, also look at their forecast using a DCF, which was again moderated based on the current environment, the COVID impact, even though it's in a digital emerging sector, which is showing significant growth, but they have also been affected in this current environment, wherein people are willing to spend less on generally going out in terms of targeting is slightly less. So that way, the business has been affected. So we had to bring in an income-based approach to see what the fair value of this particular equity value of this company would be as on date. Based on these two methods, we were able to, so under the income-based, we use the discounted cash flow. Then under the market approach, where we looked at the recent transaction, we looked at the back-solve method. The back-solve method typically looks at what the recent shareholding investment happened at what price. For example, in this case, like I mentioned, it was a Series D. They got a certain amount of investment at a certain price, based on which what the value of that company was. And then we tried to, using an option price, try to derive what that equity value would be in that particular situation. And then we used a weighted approach, a blended approach, using these two approaches to say, this is the equity value. Then this equity value was factored into your option pricing model. Now remember, like I said, this had multiple shared, had multiple preference shareholders. So each preference shareholders have different liquidation preference. For example, one particular shareholder had 2x times his liquidation preference. Then the remaining preference shareholders can come in and gets a certain bite of the cherry, so to speak. So that way, we again had to use an option pricing model, a Black-Scholes option pricing model, based on a slightly complicated structure of preference shareholders and equity, deriving, so basically like slicing that equity value that we got across these different option, option value for these different preference shareholders, equity holders, and then deriving at what the option value would be. So this is one of the methods that we use, and you try to allocate the equity value among the common preference and share option stockholders. Next slide. So for issue of shares, it's generally done as per, it's basically done as per in accordance with the companies, as per now, since we have registered valuers and valuations rules. I think the rules that are applicable right now are internationally accepted methodologies, and also any valuation standards prescribed by the regulatory body under which the valuer is registered. So generally, we can still use income-based, market approach, and cost-based. One of the case studies I would like to point out that we had worked for was a bike rental company, which had shown traction. And this was a stage wherein they were able to show a certain level of profitability, or, they were able to get their unit economics right. They were able to get traction in their revenues. So they were able to register growth. There was a product market fit. So in this case, the cost-based approach would be definitely ruled out, because the company is revenue generating and there is cash flows that the company is generating. So we looked at the DCF method for factoring or valuing the company. The comparable transaction method was looked at in terms of, because this is a very it's a very new sector. There is a lot of energy, a lot of companies are there, but in terms of transactions that were there in this particular sector, they were in terms of the multiples that we are seeing were too varied. You could also, they were like at borderline out of bounds. In terms of like, there was no way where you could normalize them or make sense out of those multiples. So we looked at those multiples, but we're not able to use those multiples. So market approach was considered. There was a market, and this company, so we tried to use the income-based approach as a DCF under this category. Next slide.
Just we don't have too much of time, so maybe just want to hurry up.
Yeah. So so I think next slide. I think there's one more case study, if I'm not mistaken. Then you can go next slide. Then I think then we can just Vinay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the companies we had done a valuation was, overseas entity had acquired the remaining stake of an Indian entity, and this was done recently in the COVID times. So this was under FEMA regulation. So under FEMA regulation, the basis of valuation again is your internationally accepted methods of valuation, and the approaches that we used was twofold. We also looked at their forecast that was provided by them. We looked at in terms of, we had a back and forth with the management in terms of better understanding what are the revenues, because in the month of March and April, the revenues had almost, was basically zero. there was a complete shutdown. There was a lockdown. So there was no revenues there. So there was discussions wherein we are trying to figure out in terms of how soon can they get a kickstart, and what level of revenues that they can, hit in the recent future, and what is the reliable estimate for the next year in terms of your 2021. What is the revenue estimate for that particular year? Long term, the impact also we need to keep in mind is that the COVID impact, again, we can build different scenarios, forecast different sensitivities, but the fact is it is not going to last forever. So we can't also be too pessimistic and consider that this is going to go on for 1, 2, 3 years. So we have to be realistic in terms of how we see this playing out, and we had considered that might be this would affect the business in the next year and a half, and that's what the effect on the revenues was. And accordingly, but the later forecast was in terms of their normal business, their growth rate. They were a fast growing company, so that had to be factored. And also we had also looked at this was this company is one of the leading companies in their segment, and the listed players are there in the market. So we are able to also benchmark with respect to the market method in terms of what are the multiples that their direct competitors are trading at, and use that also as one. As like you said, we need to estimate what the range could be, and then use a blended value of those two methods to arrive at this is the particular value of the company. Next slide, Vinay.
Yeah. Just the only thing that we need to keep in mind is that when we are using the, when the blended rate, there is to be a weightage assigned to the blend. Now that is the element of judgment that one needs to apply, and that comes in from experience and having probably seen the kind of companies that they are in the space, to say that does it fall within the reasonable valuation range that one would be probably comfortable with, and in issuing the report. So that is something which we need to take into mind, is the weightage. It's an extremely important, whether we need to assign a higher weightage to DCF or a higher weightage to a comparable market. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you can go to the next one.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just running through. I think we're just running short of time. So one of the methods that, generally when there is an international transaction between associated entities, it needs to be done at arm's length price. This comes under your transfer pricing. And this generally happens, for example, I'll give you an example now where we recently, recently did this transaction wherein a particular company, which, they have an intellectual property, they have a patent for it. Their earlier estimate was that this product is going to be launched keeping in mind the Indian market, but the traction, or in terms of, it's still far away. It's still going to take some time before they can penetrate the Indian market. So they had an associated entity in US where the product could see some future. There could be a market pretty soon. In terms of in the recent moving ahead. So they were looking to transfer this intellectual property or patent to their associated entity to the US. So what would trigger under transfer pricing would be, it has to be done at arm's length price. And also it has to be done under OECD guidelines, transfer pricing guidelines. So in terms of, since the market is, and also when they're trying to launch this product in US, there still needs to be further development to make sure that it is in compliance with the regulatory rules and regulations in the US market. But also it needs to be that they need to make certain changes. So there's no guarantee. There is still uncertainty whether they'll be still able to crack that market and what is the revenues. So the forecast was still very uncertain in terms of, there was no clear guidance from the management in terms of this is what numbers we can achieve at, because there's still a lot of, hurdles to go through. So there are certain roadblocks that they have to cross where they can make using some of the income-based approach very difficult. So even under OECD guidelines, which is what everyone looks at, or what your tax authorities will definitely look at, they say that you can only use the cost-based approach in exceptional situations, in situations where there is great uncertainty in terms of whether we can predict our forecast revenues for the particular business in hand. So in terms of under that, we again use the cost-based replacement method to see in terms of how much cost have they incurred in trying to, build, if they had to create or recreate this particular product in today's time, in today's prices, factoring in inflation, we were able to estimate this is what the value of that particular intellectual property would be. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Exactly.
I think we can move ahead. I think now.
Yeah. Quickly, just wrapping up, some of the valuation approaches that needs to be adopted under various laws is that if you're issuing unquoted equity shares, then the DCF or net asset value under 5627B read with 11 UA. Unquoted shares other than equity, many of the companies issue redeemable preference shares, convertible preference shares, CCDs. All of them will go through this route of what will be the fair value at which the price would fetch. So typically prescribed method is the DCF or a market approach or a blend of the two. Transfer of quoted shares, that is where the transfer happens between two shareholders inter se. Of course, this is on the stock exchange, and whatever is the the quoted price that happens. But if it is unquoted equity shares, then it is the adjusted net asset value. The formula is prescribed under the Rule 11 UCB. Transfer of shares other than equity, if you're doing a secondary transfer inter se, then again we got to view other than equity, which is again your redeemable preference shares, CCPS, CCDs, price it would fetch in the open market, which is what we need to probably consider. Again, this is more an income-based, a blend of income-based market approach, or individually, again depending on this the startup that you, or the company that you are valuing. But in each of these things, when we were looking at, or whenever we're carrying out this engagement, while it is an important aspect, it's an important discussion, is establishing the certainty or ensuring the level of uncertainty is reduced. So there is a very high level of conversation, deliberation, proof that we seek for, and literally proof, saying that please tell us how, and we insist on how that will happen. Either I'm ramping up, I have adequate cash flows, I've got new customers, the order pipeline is good, the deal pipeline is healthy, the quality of the customer is good, they are not holding back my receivables, the receivable timeline is about between 30 is within the reasonable time, vendors have not been unpaid. So there are so many aspects that we look at, and we consider when we're looking at each of these aspects for the purpose of valuation. Valuation for capital gains purposes, again, 50C speaks about adjusted net asset value, so that's there. But also keep in mind the three main regulations that we really look at in a given point of time: the income tax regulation, the companies laws regulation, and the FEMA regulation, depending whether there is foreign investment involved or not. And income tax insists on a merchant banker, Companies Act insists on a registered valuer, and FEMA insists on a chartered accountant or a merchant banker. The point that we are saying that as long as we are able to probably have an alignment, if the standards and rules clearly prescribe the guidelines that one needs to follow, I'm sure that we will be able to remove the ambiguity of having so many different prescribed authorities or different institutions actually doing valuation, if we could actually have one common ground prescribed for all. And that's something which probably is the ask. And this is how we will probably conclude in iteration or reiteration. Go back to basics. Valuation is about narratives and numbers, not only numbers. Valuation is not a price tag. It is a range. We can never arrive at a number, a specific number. While many regulations insist on a specific number, but it can never come to that point. Always consider macro and micro factors when you're doing valuation, qualitative and quantitative aspects. And finally, valuation is an art as well as an science. So it has to be a perfect blend of the two. And there is some element of guesstimate that goes into, a judgment goes in, and that is purely based on the experience that you carry in conducting our valuation exercise. COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID, or COVID times. The fact of the matter is there will be some level of customization required, some bespoking required. Otherwise, the principle remains the same. With this, ladies and gentlemen, probably we will conclude the session. Happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful session. It's been an outstanding session, sir, and we have received. And there are a couple of questions. I'll take a couple of questions due to paucity of time.
Sure.
They're mainly related with asking your views about the valuations which have been in the news for the current news in the recent times. So the first one. So the startup euphoria, the valuation has been done is basically been done on the top line or maybe EBITDA in cases where the company has come to profitability and operation level. So, but the multiple of EBITDA is when the EV is calculated, the multiple of EBITDA is running into hundreds. So maybe few startups are being valued at maybe say 100 times of EBITDA, or maybe 100 times of what the top line is. So are these valuations justified from? Are these valuations justified, or is it like this is a hype which is getting created, or could we term it as a bubble which was being seen in the 2001 bubble bust in US?
Yes, the answer is between yes and no. The fact of the matter is, even I am not able to understand most of these multiples that these startup, probably are able to achieve with their investors. The fact of the matter is that they have been able to. But there is a very important aspect that one needs to consider, is that at least one thing which has changed at this time is that companies have gone back to or investors, companies, and all the relevant stakeholders have gone back to the very basics. Again, I said, go back to your basics. So when you're running your business also, you need to look at saying that while I may be capturing market, there is something which is called as the cash flow, and second is the profitability, and those are aspects which are coming back into the fore. And companies which are not able to generate cash flows and are not able to generate profitability are not getting the kind of valuation that one would like to expect. Now, why startups? As I mentioned in my previous slide was, when I'm doing a startup at a pre-revenue or just about at the revenue stage, just about kind of raising their first round, maybe a pre-series round, and the kind of crazy valuation, I don't think so. We should really go down the using a calculation and say, hey, this is the 10 times revenue multiple and 100 times EBITDA, because there is no real rationalization adopted. While the promoter would have put in an Excel sheet and he would have given it to an investor, the investor also sees that the potential is good and he's willing to pay a premium for the valuation. And when you do the math, it comes down to some kind of a crazy multiple valuation. The fact of the matter is, if I were to look at it from purely from an investor perspective, he's definitely putting a price tag to this, and he's only saying how fast this price tag can move forward or give him a return. So he's well justified in his scheme of things, saying, hey, this is a company got potential, I'm willing to give a premium. Forget about the rational, whether it falls within the conventional way of evaluating balance sheets and profit and loss account, of being cash positive or earning positive. It's just the fact of the matter is that it is in a space which today requires some kind of a penetration or an opportunity which is untapped, and you're tapping into that opportunity. And finally, that investor is looking at it and saying, hey, I finally got my multiples and I'm willing to exit. But bear you in mind, there is also very strong proactive roles that everybody plays now at the board level of opening up opportunities, opening up avenues, opening up, ensuring business metrics are well within the, defined limit, not limits, but, defined conventions, and that it is going to achieve its final objective of being able to give the return of investment. So there is this classic debate between value buying versus, speculative buying. What you're talking about is, in a sense, that is value buying a more important aspect to consider, or do we really look at saying, the cart is moving forward, let's kind of load it up and ensure that it's bigger, we make it grow. So to that extent, it's somewhere between yes and no. I can't give a firm answer, but some of these are unreasonable. I also sometimes grapple with it, but that's what is happening. Is it a bubble? It's a bubble where it is burst in a few pockets, and a few cases it's going to do well. For example, let's say, I'm not saying that it's a bubble, but I just sometimes grapple with saying that when an edtech company which has got recently funded got a 10.5 billion valuation, and if I do a revenue to a valuation multiple, it just goes beyond anybody's imagination. But they added about some 22 million online subscribers to come onto the website, and they are able to mine data. How do you value data? Nobody knows, but that's the price that we are probably willing to pay for data. Can anybody tell me why RelGeo got that kind of valuation? None of us can say, come to the point to say that, oh, this is the right price or this is the not so right price. A bubble or not a bubble. The fact is the business has the potential for perpetuity. That visibility is there. I think you have takers for it. You have takers for business which have perpetuity, not a business which probably starts and finishes. And it does not have a certain period of defined lifeline. So to that extent, you got to be careful. Textile, airlines, if I may say, there are some of these tech companies which always have very high level of uncertainty. And so that's why they've never attracted the kind of investment that needs to. Like IT companies, telecom, life sciences, new age companies, new financing companies, Paytms of the world, they are able to attract customers, they are able to attract business, they are able to attract volume, they are able to mine data, and they are able to attract investors and that value of investors. Bubble or no, time will tell.
So, so that comes when like startups, but like today's stake sale by Reliance Retail for 1.75% to Silver Lake. It is also at 44 times of the EBITDA for the year financial year 1920, yeah. And the pre-money valuation of Reliance Retail is at 4.25 lakh crore, where the capital infusion by Reliance itself is at 20,000 or 30,000 crore from the latest balance sheet. So again, the question arises that even listed companies, companies like Reliance, where the EBITDA is there, where the growth is visible, but still the valuations, there are two school of thoughts over here. One says that the valuations are in line with what actually the investment has been made with, and the other says that the valuations are completely different from what actually the market forces. So, yeah. How do you take this?
So I will not. So now we are actually going to this part of the. I was telling, right? It's a dual aspect. One is a number, the other is the narrative. So here you have a company which is wanting to say that I'm going to have X multiple millions of customers on board. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. For example, let's say that Reliance Jio, they have now the market leaders. They have about 380 million subscribers. Now they're going to convert this into a business opportunity of mining data. Now they have also acquired Future Retail. So Future Retail being the largest retail operator in the country. So they have been able to manage to pick that up and make it part of their portfolio. A, they've eliminated competition. Two, that they've been able, they have a very strong pedigree. They have a very strong base. They have a subscriber to probably, kind of give it the required impetus to grow the business. And all the metrics are working. The management is great. The narrative is fantastic. It is a 1.3 billion population. Retail is going to explode once things get back to normal. So everything is working well in this segment. And if I forget about whether it did the transaction happened at 44 times. If I were to just go and do a peer comparison, let's say if I have an FMCG company which is probably trading at about 40 times its forward earnings, I mean, is that a rationale that one would really go by? But the market is willing to pay that price, right? If you were to go to some of the ID companies which are trading between 20-25 times of their forward earnings, and you're saying that, hey, but the market is willing to pay the price, only because of the fact that they are able to turn around, they're able to grow revenue-wise, they're able to generate cash flow, they're able to penetrate market, they're able to probably say a very good story, a fantastic story, and that they are also, in a sense, if you were to compare a company of their size, do I have anything to probably look at? So probability of that company surviving and doing well is far higher than like any other startup or any of those people. So typically, you may just go down the path. I mean, there's never a firm answer, Jayesh, in any of these things. All I'm saying is that it's that what is it that I'm trying to do here? What is that story that I'm saying? Again, it's a story. It's a great story, a multi-star story. And the fact is that which are those organizations which have the capability of being that conglomerate? How many? I'm asking. None. There's only one, maybe couple, maybe few. In a country of this size, few is nothing at all. So to that extent, if we are able to probably derive that premium and able to probably attract that investment and also able to show you that the business is capable of actually delivering what I'm promising, and I believe that is what it is, then I'm willing to pay the premium as well. It has no numbers. It is a combination of numbers and story. It's a story which is unlocking itself. By the way, but why are we saying that? But if you were to compare any of these companies, which is our Indian companies, to any of these conglomerates, we fall shy of that. I mean, we just completely like a tiny baby. Right? So when you say that 44 times in India, and I compare that to another opportunity outside India, I'm still a tiny, small little kind of a blip in the global environment. So can I compare myself to Amazon and say, where do I stand, for example, right? And what will it take for me to be that conglomerate and to be that company, to be that visionary, to be that aspect, create products, create services, create size, create market, create opportunity, create, innovate, adapt, and all of it is have a great governance standard, and all of it is working well. So why not pay premium for it?
True, sir. True. Very true. I mean, if you compare it on the global terms, then yeah, we are peanuts. I mean, like in that terms.
Apple turned
So
$2
I'll just take the
trillion.
last question, sir.
Yeah.
I'll just take the last
Please.
question. It's a bit controversial question. I mean,
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
I can't hear you.
The valuation world. I mean, the participant has. Are you able to hear me, sir? Now, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible now.
Now you're audible.
Perfect. So I put this question, which created a lot of debates. So one of the participants has, can you give a glimpse of how the valuation method was used in case of WeWork? Because now now since the valuation has dropped down substantially of Corona because of this COVID, what was the reason for this hyped valuation which it took to $47 billion, and what not the figures were? So can you just give us a glimpse of what valuation methodology is in case of we?
Okay, sorry, I don't have the exact matrices now. If you want, I can have that sent across to the participant or to the general group as a whole, but I don't have that working at the moment. In fact, we had prepared a slide on the entire LGO and the entire future retail as what valuation metrics is that it went about, how they went about. But in the paucity of time, I can share that, and we can probably, it's a much longest debate, but for VWorks, I don't have the details at the moment.
Okay, sir. Okay. But thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session. They say it that way, that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Same goes with the valuation. That the valuation lies in the eyes of the valuer. How valuation can be done from various companies' point of view, say startups, say listed companies, say unlisted companies of established business. So thank you, sir. Thank you for the solution on valuation, and we look forward for such many more such sessions.
Thank you, and thank you to all the participants for being a great, patiently hearing.